Across 40 millennia of war, one figure stands at the very heart of humanity's survival. He is known only as the Emperor, ruler of terror, master of the Imperium. To billions, he is worshipped as a god. To his closest followers, he was a man of vision, perhaps the greatest who ever lived. Yet for all his majesty, so little of his true nature is understood. Was he a savior or a trickster, a father or a tyrant? In this video, we will trace the story of the Emperor of mankind, beginning not with the throne nor the Imperium, but with his hidden origins, his earliest relationships, and the first steps of the long path that led to humanity's empire among the stars. The emperor's story begins in the 8th millennium before Christ, when humanity was still bound to river valleys. The wisest of psychers foresaw a threat that would one day devour their kind. The gods of the warp, hungry for mortal souls. These men were known as the shamans, and they carried the knowledge of countless lifetimes. For at death, their spirits did not fade, but reincarnated, century after century. Yet they knew even this ancient cycle could not endure against the rising tide of chaos. Thousands gathered, and in one act of deliberate unity, they took poison, casting their souls together into the immaterium. From that torrent of sacrifice, a single being was born, the new man destined to guide humanity. A year later, in a village along the Sakarya River in Anatolia, a child was born to mortal parents, and he was the vessel of that sacrifice, the one who would be called the Emperor. Even as a boy, his power showed itself. When his father was murdered by his uncle, the child prepared the body for burial, and in that moment a vision came, revealing the truth. With calm, with no anger, he approached his uncle, and with a thought ended his life. It was then he understood. Humanity needed law, order, and a ruler strong enough to impose them. And so the boy left his village behind, walking into the first cities of man, a silent figure who would never again be merely human. As centuries turned, the man who would become the emperor did not remain idle. He walked among his people, sometimes as a king, sometimes as a scholar, sometimes as a ghost who passed unnoticed through the ages. He wore many faces, some brutal conquerors, others humble wanderers, but all served one purpose: to guide and guard humanity, to sharpen its edge against the darkness he knew was coming. In these wanderings he found others who, like him, could not die. One of the first was Erda, a perpetual like himself. Where he spoke of destiny and the need to drive mankind toward unity, she saw children, sons, to be protected, and their partnership would forever be shadowed by that difference. Another was Olanius Person, a warrior whose loyalty and defiance would echo across history. With Olanius as his warmaster, the emperor raised armies and waged wars not for land or wealth, but to wrest knowledge from the grasp of darker powers. Together they assaulted a tower in Phoenicia, a fortress of the cognate cult, its walls bleeding with the corruption of the warp. When the battle was won, the emperor sought to preserve the forbidden knowledge within, for even poison could be a weapon against chaos. But Olanius, horrified, chose a different path. He plunged a dagger into his king, spoke a word of enuncia, and brought the tower crashing down. In that betrayal, friendship was broken, yet their names would remain forever entwined. Through these ages, the emperor became many figures in the annals of mankind. Some whisper he stood as Alexander, who wept when he believed no worlds remained to conquer. Always he was there at the margins of history, watching, waiting, guiding. In his long wanderings, the emperor came upon things older than empires. Chief among them was the Golden Throne, an ancient device hidden beneath the deserts of Asia, a relic of unimaginable unimaginable power. It was the tool through which he began to shape a future free from the corruptive reach of the warp. He dreamed of replacing warp travel with the webway, a labyrinth of safe, artificial passages beyond the immaterium, severing humanity from its dependence on chaos forever. It was during this age that the Emperor journeyed with Olivia Sureka, another of the immortal perpetuals, to the world of Molech. There, hidden in ancient ruins, stood a gateway that opened into the very realm of the dark gods. Against all wisdom, the Emperor entered. What bargain he struck inside is known only to him and his immortal enemies. But when he emerged, he carried within him a portion of their power, power enough to fashion the Primarchs. Yet where chaos expected him to spread their dominion across mankind, he betrayed them. Instead, he turned their stolen gifts against them, becoming anathema to the gods he had deceived. When the storms of the warp tore across the galaxy during the Age of Strife, Terra itself fell into ruin. Nation warred against nation, psychers were born in numbers too great to contain, and humanity's cradle was a wasteland of tyranny and blood. It was then that the Emperor revealed himself openly, no longer content to haunt history in secret. He appeared first as a warlord among many, one contender for a dying world, but unlike the rest, he bore vision and a purpose older than memory. Among his earliest allies was Malcador the Sigillite, a mortal man of immense psychic ability and will. Malcador became his closest companion and confidant, the one who persuaded him to take the mantle of Emperor. Another was Constantine Valdor, master of the Custodian Guard, the Golden Warriors who would serve as the Emperor's personal shield. Together they began the work of uniting Terra under one rule, fighting what became known as the Unification Wars. At his command fought the Thunder Warriors, the first generation of gene-forged soldiers, savage and brutal but loyal only to him. With their might, he crushed the techno-barbarian kings, the mutant lords, and the psyker tyrants who preyed on mankind. But the Thunder Warriors were unstable, their rage too great, their bodies too flawed. When their task was complete, they were purged, swept aside to make way for something greater, the Space Marines. He worked with Erda, the Perpetual, blending her genetic material with his own to forge 20 children, the Primarchs. Each was a demigod of war, designed to be a general and a guide to the legions that would follow them. But chaos struck back. In a storm of sorcery, the Primarchs were scattered across the stars, torn from his laboratory and hurled to distant worlds. The Emperor's fury could not call them back, yet he knew they lived, their echoes still reaching him through the warp. To replace what had been stolen, he created their second children, the Space Marines, crafted from the gene seed of the Primarchs themselves. These warriors, no less mighty than the conquerors of myth, would march at the Emperor's side in the wars to come. When at last the wars were won, Terra knelt in unity under a single banner for the first time in millennia. From the ruins of the cradle of mankind, the Emperor declared his next ambition, the Great Crusade, a march to the stars to reunite humanity scattered across the galaxy. For this, he would need not only armies, but his lost sons. The Emperor turned his gaze outward. He forged an alliance with the Mechanicum of Mars, the ancient cult of engineers and priest-technologists who worshipped the machine god. This pact, known as the Treaty of Mars, gave him ships, weapons, and the industrial might of the Red Planet. With this alliance sealed, he launched the Great Crusade, a vast campaign to reunite the scattered fragments of humanity across the stars, cast down alien empires, and forge a single imperium. But even as the crusade began, the Emperor's greatest creations were still missing, the Primarchs. As the crusade pushed further into the void, he found them one by one, each grown to adulthood, each shaped by the world upon which they had landed. The first and dearest was Horus Lupercal, raised on the harsh world of Chthoniya. Unlike many of his brothers, Horus had grown grown close to humanity, learning loyalty and ambition in equal measure. The emperor discovered him early, and for decades they fought side by side. Horus became his truest companion and most trusted son, fighting at his right hand in countless wars. When others later accused the emperor of favoritism, it was Horus they pointed to, and perhaps they were right. Other sons soon followed. Robute Giliman, found on Macraga, was a statesman and a master of order, building a stable realm even before his father's arrival. Leman Russ, the Wolf King of Fenris, was a warrior of feral strength and primal cunning. Magnus the Red, whose towering frame and unmatched psychic gifts made him both awe-inspiring and dangerous, shared his father's fascination with knowledge. Each reunion brought triumph, but also tension, for the brothers were not alike. They were reflections of the emperor, fractured into different aspects: loyalty, savagery, wisdom, pride, and so they loved and rivaled each other in equal measure. When the emperor found them, the Primarchs were united with their gene-crafted sons, the Space Marines. They liberated worlds enslaved by alien empires, toppled tyrants, and brought the light of the Imperium to the stars. Together, father and sons carved an empire out of darkness, and for a time it seemed as if nothing could halt their ascent. Yet the seeds of tragedy were already sown, for though the Primarchs were mighty, they were also flawed. Each bore his own pride, his own vision of what mankind should be. The emperor, brilliant and distant, often failed to see how deeply those flaws cut. As the Great Crusade thundered across the stars, the emperor's vision became reality. World after world was brought into compliance, and the legions grew into unstoppable engines of conquest. But the galaxy was vast, and even the emperor could not be everywhere at once. To carry his will forward, he needed a commander who could lead in his stead. That honor, that burden, fell to Horus. After the victory at Ulanor, where the legions shattered the greatest Orc empire yet encountered, the emperor gathered his sons and his armies. Before them all, he proclaimed Horus Warmaster, supreme commander of the Great Crusade. To Horus it was both triumph and trial, the proof that he was his father's chosen, but also a mantle heavy with expectation. To his brothers, the declaration was a spark of jealousy and doubt. Gilliman, Perturabo, Dawn, Russ, each thought himself worthy. Magnus, ever the seeker of hidden truths, wondered why his father drew closer to Horus than to him. With Horus raised above his brothers, the emperor turned back to terror. For beneath the imperial palace, he pursued his webway project, a vast labyrinth of stable passages through the immaterium, a human-built rival to the ancient network of the Eldar. If completed, it would cut humanity free from dependence on warp travel and shield it from the corruption of chaos. The emperor believed it was the key to mankind's survival, a step toward a future free of the warp's predation. To many, it felt like abandonment. Even Horus, though raised above all others, carried unease. His father's trust was both gift and isolation, for who could bear such weight without breaking? And so the fault lines deepened. Some Primarchs sought to follow their father's example, building realms of order and stability. Others raged at being passed over, their pride festering. The emperor believed he had secured the future, but in truth his absence created the space in which doubt, rivalry, and betrayal would grow. It was in this silence that chaos whispered, and in this silence that Horus, the brightest star of them all, would begin to fall. Horus, Warmaster of the Imperium, bore his father's mantle with pride and with strain. He was brilliant, charismatic, and beloved by the legions, but he was also mortal flesh wrapped around demi-godly power, and mortals, even Primarchs, can bleed. It was during the campaign on Davin, a world rotting with corruption, that fate struck. There, Horus was wounded by a ritual dagger, a blade steeped in the essence of the warp. The cut should not have undone a Primarch, yet the poison was not of this world. It burned through him, body and soul, dragging him towards death. Desperate, his sons carried him to the Serpent Lodge, a cultic order masquerading as healers. But these were no true physicians. They were servants of chaos, and within their lodge Horus fell into visions. He walked the halls of eternity and saw a galaxy where the Emperor was worshipped as a god. He saw humanity bent, shackled, not liberated, and in that moment of weakness, the whispers of the ruinous powers reached him. They promised him truth, that his father had lied, that the Emperor sought divinity for himself while abandoning his sons. They offered him freedom, dominion, even godhood of his own, if only he would turn. Horus resisted, but his pride, his wounds, his fear that he had been used and discarded, all of these were threads the dark gods pulled tight. When he rose from the Serpent Lodge, his wounds had healed, but his loyalty was broken. The War Master had become the arch-traitor. From that moment, Horus began to weave a web of betrayal. He whispered to his brothers, to Fulgrim, who longed for perfection, to Mortarion, who hated his father's lies, to Angron, enslaved by his own rage, to Lorgar, the prophet of gods, unacknowledged. One by one he turned them, until half the legions bent knee to him. The Emperor's dream, a galaxy united, began to fracture. Brother would soon fight brother, and the stars would run red with the blood of the legions. The outcome of each struggle only served one truth. Horus was carving a path to terror, and all knew that when the War Master reached the cradle of mankind, the Emperor himself would at last be forced to act. One mistake the Emperor could not ignore was that of his son Magnus the Red. He sought to warn his father of Horus's treachery, but his warning came as a wound. His psychic message, hurled across the void, tore through the Emperor's wards and shattered the machinery of the Golden Throne. What Magnus intended as salvation became calamity. The Emperor, stricken with grief and anger, cast his son aside. He commanded Leman Russ and the Space Wolves to bring Magnus before him in chains. But Horus twisted that order, turning a demand for judgment into an edict of destruction. Prospero burned, and the 1,000 suns were all but lost. While the galaxy bled, the Emperor was forced to fight a war of his own, not in the stars, but beneath the stone of the imperial palace. Magnus's breach in the webway poured demons into the heart of terror, and only the Emperor's constant exertion upon the throne kept the tide at bay. Day and night, the custodian guard and the Sisters of Silence held the line with bolter and blade, while their master shouldered the infinite weight of the warp. For a long time the Emperor endured, holding shut the breach Magnus had torn. At last, even his near-limitless strength began to falter. His body showed signs of fatigue. Blood ran from his nose, his spirit taxed beyond mortal comprehension. Then, in the darkness of the warp, he felt something stir, the birth of a new power, a demon blade called Drachnion. Knowing the climax was at hand, the Emperor gave a terrible command. 1,000 psychers were gathered and sacrificed to the Golden Throne, allowing it to burn for one single day without him. With that borrowed time, the Emperor cast aside his vigil and strode into the webway itself to rescue the last of his retreating armies. Within the storm, something darker stirred. At first it was only a shadow in the ash, a shape that walked where others writhed. As it drew near, the Emperor's gaze fixed upon it, and his voice carried in thought alone the echo of the first murder, a thing older than empires, older than gods, the memory of the first man to strike another down in blood and hate, given endless life in the warp. It came forward in the guise of a man, long-haired, tribal, scarred by ancient wounds, and yet all who beheld it felt the weight of its true nature. Pure malice, pure predation. The Emperor advanced to meet it. The webway shook as two beings of absolute power collided. His sword met its claws in sparks of psychic fire, each strike a thunderclap that cracked the walls of the tunnel. The demon moved with impossible speed, sliding in and out of existence, its talons talons whistling through the air. The Emperor matched it, his blade becoming a storm of golden light, cutting, parrying, thrusting with divine precision. Every clash burned another dozen demons to ash. Yet for all his might, the foe was unlike any he had faced before. Not a beast, not a god, but the living essence of murder itself. And then it struck. 5 talons, long as spears, tore through the Emperor's armor and into his flesh. For the first time in an age, the master of mankind bled. His sword slipped from his grip as the demon lifted him bodily from the ground, its claws dripping with his lifeblood. All around, the custodians cried out, voices raw with disbelief. To see their immortal lord wounded was unthinkable. To see him helpless was blasphemy made flesh. Among them was Ra Endymion, custodian and most faithful guardian. In that moment, Ra felt dread, a thing his kind were bred never to know. Yet fear could not halt him. He hurled himself forward, slaying demon after demon, his spear flashing silver in the gloom. Each stroke was desperation given form. He had to reach his emperor. He had to stand at his side. The demon's mocking thought pressed into every mind. I am the end of empires. But the emperor's reply thundered back, defiant even in pain. Perhaps one day, but not this day. With a surge of psychic might, he tore himself free and seized his fallen sword. Golden fire erupted, burning the nearest demons to nothing. But in his chest still lodged the weapon of nightmares. Draconian, the living blade, the end of empires. Its soul-carved steel writhed in his grasp, faces upon its surface screaming as they drank his blood. The emperor ripped it from his body and hurled it away with a roar of fury. But its essence lived on, and Ra felt it. The blade was in him now, not in flesh, but in spirit. Its hunger poured into his veins, searing his bones, latching onto his soul like a parasite. His body became a cage, his agony the bars of its prison. In that moment, understanding struck him like lightning. This was why the emperor had shown him visions, why he alone of the custodians had been granted the truth of his master's dreams. It was not for glory, it was not for command, it was for this, to carry the burden even the emperor could not destroy. Blood streamed from his mouth, his vision swam, yet Ra stood, forcing his legs to move, his spear to rise. He would not look to his master for comfort, he would not ask for explanation. He was born for duty, raised for obedience, chosen for this destiny. Each step he took away from the emperor carried the demon farther from him, and each step meant another day the Imperium might endure. The emperor, still bleeding, still radiant, turned his gaze upon his faithful son, and with a voice that shook the webway itself, he gave his final command. Run. And so Ra Endymion, jailer of Draconian, last son of a water thief, obeyed. He turned from his lord, bearing the demon within him, and vanished into the fire and ash. His sacrifice bought mankind time. Another day, another year, another chance. The emperor fought on, his golden blade a sun in the darkness. But he would never forget the one who ran. And so, after the battle in the webway, the emperor was forced to make the most terrible of sacrifices. The portal he had sought to claim for humanity's salvation was sealed, not by triumph, but by defeat. He took his seat upon the golden throne once more, not as a ruler, but as a prisoner. Shackled to the machine by his own will, he became both jailer and captive, his power the only thing keeping the tides of the warp at bay. Thus the stage was set, the emperor bound to the throne, the traitor warmaster marching on terror, with half the legions at his back. The walls of the imperial palace yet stood, but the storm was coming. The greatest siege in the history of mankind was about to begin. As Horus besieged the soul system in the material realm, so too did the dark gods unleash their fury in the warp. And there, in that storm, the emperor alone held back the tide. Often, He appeared not as a golden warlord, but as a weary old man in a fur cloak, hunched over the last embers of a dying fire. It was in this place that Horus came to him, taking the form of a wolf. He mocked his father, calling him a tyrant, a liar, a fool who sought to chain mankind. But the emperor refused to answer. He looked past his fallen son and spoke only to the shadows themselves, rejecting the ruinous powers outright. Their puppet was nothing. Yet as his fire guttered low, the darkness pressed in, and when Horus reached Terra, the flames at last died. The War Master gloated that his father had no path left but to flee. During the siege, the Emperor remained bound to the throne, sustaining the psychic barrier that held demons at bay. It was his will alone that kept even the demon primarchs from walking Terra's soil. When that barrier was weakened by ritual slaughter, it still held firm enough that Angron himself could not breach the walls. Even at the height of battle, the Emperor's burden was absolute. There was a moment of temptation. To end the heresy quickly, he could have claimed the power that was his by right. He could have ascended into godhood, not a false idol, but a true god of humanity, born in fire and blood, the Dark King. Malcador felt this change and trembled, and for a heartbeat the Emperor stood at the edge of that abyss. But he turned away. It was Olanius Person, an immortal friend from forgotten ages, who reminded him of what he truly was. Not a god, not a king of lies, but a man with a burden so vast it broke all others who tried to share it, but still a man. Person begged him to trust humanity, to gamble everything on the chance that they could endure without worshipping him as divine. And the Emperor listened. He cast aside the mantle of the Dark King. He chose not to ascend. That rejection came at a price. Malcador saw it in the weave of his soul. A shard of compassion, the last ember of his humanity, was torn away in the act. Malcador hoped that one day, perhaps, it might return, but there was no more time. Horus had dropped his shields. The end was upon them. The Emperor gathered his sons and his captains, Sanguinius, Dawn, and Valdor. Against all their protests, he declared that he would face Horus himself. The final confrontation was no longer a matter of war. It was father against son, master against war master. The fate of mankind resting not on fleets and armies, but on one duel aboard the vengeful spirit. On the shattered deck of the war master's flagship, Gavial Loken tried to stand against the being that had once been his commander and father figure. But Horus Lupercal was no longer a primarch. He was a monstrous, blood-lit avatar of chaos, swollen with the power of 4 gods and armored in their favor. Even before Loken could reach him, the crackling field of immaterial energy surrounding Horus swept the warrior aside like dust on the wind, hurling him across the oil-dark floor. From his knees, Loken called out, but his voice was lost in the rushing whispers of the warp that filled the court. He could only watch as Horus, eyes alight with ruin, enacted what he thought would be his final act. Worldbreaker, the War Master's maul, rose and fell. Again and again it struck until the Emperor's head was driven into the deck, his skull shattered, his golden form apparently lifeless. Loken, battered and desperate, rose once more. He begged Horus to release the darkness that bound him, to prove that he was still master of his fate and not merely the plaything of the gods. The War Master hesitated. The black mantle of ruin seemed heavy upon him. He let it slip just for an instant, and the whispers of the Neverborn turned to shrieks of horror. Horus had loosed the power, drained it from himself as if casting off a cloak. For the first time since his ascension, he felt a flicker of release, even of grief. But the whispers did not abate. They rose louder, carrying not mockery, but a phrase spoken in unison by a million voices across the species. The Emperor must live. Horus realized too late what had happened. What he had killed was only an aspect, a shell, the semblance of a corpse. The Emperor had never truly been defeated. In that moment of doubt, When Horus had opened himself, the emperor returned, not alone, but borne by the faith of mankind itself. The illusion of Loken dissolved, and in his place stood the master of mankind, ruined in body but transfigured in light, carrying not only his own indomitable will, but the collective belief of humanity. Horus roared in denial, trying to reclaim the darkness he had discarded, clawing it back into himself. But the tide was slow, reluctant to return, and the emperor pressed forward. This was no longer father against son alone. It was the emperor, fused with the spirit of his people, against the hollowed champion of the warp. The true reckoning had begun. The fight was agony on both sides. Horus, diminished after casting off the god's gift, clawed desperately to restore his full strength. The emperor, already broken, fought with the last measure of his being, carried by the will of mankind that screamed his name across the immaterium. Each blow carried the weight of aeons, the outcome shaping all future history. Then came the moment of truth. The emperor's light lanced out from his remaining eye, a psychic torrent that incinerated Horus from within. The War Master faltered, falling to his knees, pleading wordlessly for the return of his stolen power. The gods would have restored him, but his eyes betrayed the truth. He wanted release. He wanted his father to end it. The emperor, too wounded to finish the task by force alone, reached for another weapon. In his hand appeared the ancient stone dagger, once borne into the chamber by Olanius Person, the perpetual who had stood against Horus in defiance. That humble blade, anathema to the warp itself, carried the one power that could sever the gods' champion from their grasp. The emperor drove it into his son's heart. Horus Lupercal, first found and favored son, war master of the Great Crusade, was destroyed utterly. Body, soul, and the corruption that consumed him. The god's champion was ended, not by the warp's storms nor by the emperor's fire, but by the small, ugly blade carried by a mortal who had dared to stand against him. The duel was finished. Horus was gone. The emperor, mortally wounded, would never rise again, condemned to the golden throne. The heresy ended in that instant, not with victory, but with survival, bought at the highest possible cost. From that duel, that day, the emperor of mankind no longer walks among his people. What remains of his once mighty form is confined within the golden throne. It has become a prison. The emperor's body is ruined. His flesh hangs in tatters, his bones shattered beyond repair. The last flickers of his life are bound to the machinery of the throne, which sustains him in a state between life and death. Around him hums a labyrinth of pipes, cables, and arcane machinery so vast that generations of tech priests have given up ever understanding its full design. The throne is a tomb, a machine, and a god relic all at once. And yet, within that husk still burns his will. Every day, thousands of psychers are led in chains into the vaults beneath the palace. They are terrified men and women, dragged from across the galaxy by the black ships of the Inquisition. One by one, they are sacrificed. Their souls are torn apart, their life essence fed to the throne, consumed to keep the emperor alive for a few more days. To the Imperium, this slaughter is necessity. To the emperor, it is a bitter burden, for he once fought to free mankind from the tyranny of gods and their hunger for worship and sacrifice. Now, through him, humanity has become more dependent upon it than ever, and beyond is another burden. The webway beneath the palace still festers with the wound torn open by Magnus the Red. It is a rent into the realm of chaos, a scar that could flood terror with demons if left unguarded for even a moment. The emperor must hold it shut at all times. The strain is unimaginable. His entire existence is now dedicated to this ceaseless vigil, fighting a war that no one else can see, holding back a tide that has never ceased. exist. Thus, the throne is not only a life support machine, it is a battlefield. The emperor sits upon it as both ruler and jailer, warding off damnation with every heartbeat. And in his silence, the Imperium has grown into something far from what he once intended. The emperor never wanted to be a god. He told his sons this plainly, warning them that worship was a trap, another form of tyranny, another chain. He envisioned a humanity guided by reason, unity, and strength, free from superstition. Yet in his silence upon the throne, the opposite came to pass. The Imperium began to worship him as a god. To billions, he is no longer the man who once walked among them, but the master of mankind, eternal, the God-Emperor upon the throne. Cathedrals rose across every world, statues carved to depict him as a divine being, and scripture was written to proclaim his eternal will. Faith, not reason, became the bond of the Imperium. At the heart of this was the ecclesiarchy, the adeptus ministorum, a church that grew into the Imperium's most powerful institution. Its priests proclaim the emperor's divinity as absolute truth. To question it is heresy, punishable by death. Its missionaries spread across the galaxy, bringing worlds into compliance not only with bolter and flame, but with prayer and sermon. Where once the emperor sought unity through truth, the Imperium binds itself together through belief, and belief has teeth. From the wars of faith rose the Adepta Sororitas, the sisters of battle, warrior nuns of the ecclesiarchy, who wield bolter, flamer, and chainsword with holy zeal. Now they are the hammer of the faith, martyrs and soldiers in one, feared as much for their devotion as for their firepower. To the masses, they are proof that the emperor's light burns through his chosen daughters. It is a cruel irony. The man who denied godhood has become the galaxy's most powerful god in all but name. Billions cry out to him every day. Entire crusades are launched in his name. And though the emperor himself may still silently reject such worship, it is belief, not truth, that sustains his Imperium. And so the throne room became a temple. The Imperium itself became a church. The emperor's dream was inverted, and humanity was bound, not freed by faith. And then there is the Inquisition. Born from Malcador's hidden design, it emerged after the emperor's fall to act in his name. It is their task to safeguard humanity, not only from alien and mutant, but from humanity itself. They are sanctioned to destroy worlds, to burn entire civilizations, in order to root out corruption. They claim to serve the throne, but in truth they serve the silence. For who can say what the emperor actually wills, locked in eternal torment, his voice but a whisper in dreams and visions? The high lords of terror govern, the ecclesiarchy preaches, the Inquisition judges, and the custodes guard. Each claims authority by interpreting the emperor's will, yet each bends it in different ways. The man who once guided humanity with a singular hand now lies motionless, and in that silence the Imperium has fractured into 1,000 competing visions. And so the emperor's dream darkened further. Where once he commanded unity, now his servants speak in his name, and none can say for certain who speaks the truth. Amongst the priesthood of Mars and Terra, none has loomed larger than Belisarius Cawl, born in the Great Crusade, older than any mortal man should be. Cawl is a patchwork of flesh, memory, and steel. His body is a conglomeration of cloned organs, artificial limbs, and uploaded consciousness. His mind a labyrinth of half-forgotten bargains and secret instructions. Cawl claims that his work began with the emperor's own command, that in some half-lit chamber, during the closing days of the heresy, he was given a task to prepare for the day humanity would need more than what the legions had been. Across the millennia he labored, drawing on forbidden knowledge, stitching together the fragments of science and sorcery left in the emperor's wake. The result was the Primaris project, taller, stronger, and more stable than their forebears. The Primaris Astartes were the culmination of Kaul's obsession. They emerged in the galaxy's darkest hour, released only at the command of Roboute Guilliman upon his return to Terra. These warriors became the spearhead of the Indomitus Crusade, the largest campaign since the Great Crusade itself. Every Primaris who marches is a monument to both his foresight and his failure. They are proof that the Emperor's work endures, but also proof of how far it has drifted from his intent. The Imperium grows stronger through them, but less human, less free, less the vision he once carried across the stars. Kaul's rise also coincided with one of the Emperor's sons' return. Roboute Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines and newly reborn after 10,000 years, entered the Sanctum Imperialis. Guilliman expected solace, perhaps even a father's welcome. What he received was something colder. The Emperor's presence overwhelmed him, not as a parent, but as a force, vast, calculating, stripped of warmth. To Guilliman, it was like standing before an alien intelligence, one that had burned away all pretense of humanity. The Emperor named him both son and tool, the last hope, but nothing more. Guilliman left, shaken, burdened not only with command of the Imperium, but with the revelation that his father had become something terrifyingly distant, and he stood alone without brothers or his father for comfort. Another intervention came during the Plague Wars. On a garden world, Mortarion struck Guilliman down with the God Blight, a disease that no mortal, no Primarch could survive. As the regent of the Imperium lay dying, the priest called out in faith, and through him the Emperor answered. For a heartbeat, his will surged across the warp, burning into Nurgle's garden itself. The rot god recoiled as the Emperor's light tore across his realm. Guilliman rose, resurrected, his father's power still burning within him. To the faithful, this was a miracle. To Guilliman, it was another chain, proof that his father, once a man who spurned gods, now wielded power as one. And in the darkness of the Imperium's long twilight, a shadow stirred upon the rock. For 10,000 years, Lionel Johnson had slumbered in secret, his body hidden, his will withdrawn. Yet as the galaxy buckled beneath Abaddon's long war and the rift split the stars, the lion returned. No clarion call heralded him, no banners unfurled. He awoke alone, rising from his vigil as though no time had passed, a blade unsheathed in silence. His eyes opened upon a realm drowned in heresy and despair, and he knew that his father's dream had not died. It had simply endured the long night, awaiting his hand. And in those first moments of waking, the Emperor spoke, not in thunder, nor in command, but as a whisper carried from the throne through the veil of eternity. The lion heard his father's voice, not as words, but as certainty, that his path was not yet done, that his place in the great design remained. To him was given a relic of faith and defiance, the Emperor's shield, not wrought by mortal artifice, but wrought in the crucible of divinity. It blazed with warding light against the powers of the warp. With blade in one hand and shield in the other, the lion walked from shadow into fire. He was no longer the hidden son, no longer the secret keeper of Caliban. He was the Emperor's justice reborn, and his return marked a reckoning the traitors could not escape. On his return, the lion did not seek thrones nor acclaim. Instead, he became the blade in the dark, striking where the Imperium's defenses faltered, cutting traitor and heretic from the roots. He gathered to him the scattered sons of the First Legion, reforging them not as lords of hidden shame, but as knights of purpose once more. Across riven worlds, he brought order from ruin, his shield turning aside the touch of demons, his sword delivering judgment. Though Guilliman ruled as regent, it was the lion who hunted the enemies that slipped through the cracks, a silent guardian whose every victory whispered that the Emperor's will had not been broken, and that hope yet walked in armor of midnight and gold. These moments show that the Emperor endures, but at a cost. Every intervention burns against his torment. Every word spoken shatters the silence of centuries. His struggle is constant, to guide, to protect, and to endure without surrendering what remains of himself. 10,000 years have passed since the emperor fell upon the vengeful spirit, struck down by the son he loved most. 10,000 years since he was bound to the golden throne, his body ruined, his dream in ashes. The imperium he sought to build, a rational, united empire of mankind, has become a theocracy of blood and fire. His followers call him a god. His warriors kneel as zealots. His name is spoken in prayer more often than in reason. This was not his design, and yet without that faith, humanity would already be extinct. Some whisper of rebirth, the star child, the sensei, the promise of resurrection. Others speak of apocalypse, that his death would herald mankind's final fall. The truth is hidden even from those who serve him most closely. But this much is certain: the emperor still watches, still endures, still suffers. Whether he is a god or a man chained by his own dream, the imperium rests upon his torment. And as long as he endures, so too does humanity.